On the anniversary of his late wife's death, my son sat down at the kitchen table and told me that my presence in the house was making his new wife uncomfortable and that it was time for me to move to a state-run facility. Old man. Hi everyone, welcome to Revenge Blueprint. If you love true family stories that show the deep pain of betrayal and the silent power of consequences, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications. You'll want to stay until the end to see how a father's silence can become the most devastating lesson a family ever has to learn. The kitchen clock always ticked too loud after 5 p.m. I'm Thomas Miller. For 42 years, I kept the diesel engines of the Oregon coast running. My hands are stained with grease that soap can't reach anymore. My knuckles don't bend the way they used to, but I still know the exact sound of a failing cylinder before the machine even starts to smoke. After my Martha passed 3 years ago, the house became too big. The silence hung in the corners like cobwebs. That was when my son, Mark, suggested he and his new wife, Cynthia, move in. He wanted to take over the old repair shop behind the house. He said he wanted to keep the family legacy alive. I agreed. I didn't ask for rent. A working-class father doesn't charge his own blood for sleeping under the roof he built with his own 2 hands. But a house doesn't stay the same when a stranger enters it. Cynthia brought new smells, perfumes that made my throat tight, and a way of walking that made the floorboards feel small. She didn't like the mud on my boots. She didn't like the sound of my old sea stories. Every morning I would sit on the back porch with my coffee. I watched Mark work in the shop. He was slow with the wrench. He didn't have the feel for the iron, but he was my boy. I stayed out of his way. Then the small things started disappearing. First, it was Martha's old blue armchair. I came home from the grocery store one Tuesday and found it sitting by the curb, soaked in a sudden autumn drizzle. It was collecting dust, Tom, Cynthia said. She didn't look up from her tablet. Her nails were painted the color of dried blood. We need the space for the new sectional. I didn't argue. I went to the garage, got a tarp, and covered the chair. A man doesn't scream about furniture, but the house was changing. The boarders were closing in on me. By winter, I was living mostly in the small den near the kitchen. My boots were restricted to the back mat. My coffee mug, the one with the faded anchor Martha bought me in San Diego, was replaced by a gray ceramic cup that felt thin in my grip. They thought I was getting old. They thought because my eyes watered in the cold wind, I couldn't see what was happening right under my nose. Mark stopped asking for my advice on the heavy trucks. He started locking the ledger book in the top drawer of the shop desk. Whenever I walked into the office, the talking stopped. Cynthia would adjust her collar, and Mark would suddenly find a piece of paper very interesting. One evening, the rain was hitting the tin roof of the workshop like gravel. I went down to fetch my spare pair of reading glasses from the workbench. The side door wasn't clicked shut. Inside, the yellow light was hanging low over the desk. Mark was sitting down, his head in his hands. Cynthia was standing over him, her fingers tapping against the metal filing cabinet. "He's 70, Mark," she hissed. Her voice had that sharp, thin edge that could cut through a man's patience. "The deed is still in his name. If he signs the partnership over to the Miller Group, we get the distributor license. If he stays, we stay small-time mechanics until the bank takes the tools." "He built this place, Cynthia," Mark muttered. His shoulders were hunched. He looked like his mother when she was tired, but without her grit. "He built it for you," she said, leaning down. Her shadow covered him completely. "But he's hoarding it. He treats you like an apprentice. Look at the way he looks at your work. He thinks you're weak. We deserve the expansion. We deserve the house." I stood in the dark, the cold rain dripping down the back of my neck. I didn't feel my heart race. When you faced a rogue wave in the middle of the Pacific, you learn how to freeze your blood. You don't yell. You listen for the structural crack. I walked back to the house without my glasses. The next 3 months, I became the ghost they wanted me to be. I ate my dinner early. I kept my mouth shut. But every night, after the lights went out in their bedroom, I went out to the shop with a flashlight. I didn't need the ledger key. I knew the old desk. If you press the grain on the left side of the bottom drawer, the back lock pops open. It's an old carpenter's trick my father taught me. Inside, I didn't find normal bills. I found invoices from a logistics firm out of Portland, the Miller Group. They weren't just trying to expand the shop. Cynthia had already negotiated a sale of the land. The workshop, the 3 acres of coastal property, the house, everything. They had listed me as a non-managing occupant with diminishing capacity. They were building a case to show the county that I was no longer fit to hold the commercial title. Mark had signed his name at the bottom of the disclosure forms. His handwriting was shaky, but the ink was dry. The final blow didn't come with a shout. It came on a Thursday night, the exact anniversary of the day Martha passed away. I had spent the afternoon at the cemetery. The grass was wet, and the wind was coming hard off the water. I cleaned the stone, came home, and boiled 2 potatoes for dinner. Simple food, the kind of food that keeps a man grounded. I was sitting at the small kitchen table when they walked in. They were dressed up. Cynthia had a new leather coat. Mark smelled like expensive cologne and cheap whiskey. They sat down across from me. Mark wouldn't look at my eyes. He kept staring at the salt shaker. "Tom," Cynthia started, her voice smooth like oil on water. "We had a long meeting with the regional developers today. The deal is moving fast." But they looked at the property layout. Having an elderly relative living on site, it raises liability insurance for the commercial zone. I chewed my potato, swallowed. "Is that so?" "We found a place," she said. She slid a glossy brochure across the Formica table. It showed a building with white walls and manicured lawns 30 miles inland, the Oaks. It has 24-hour medical staff. "Mark and I think it's the safest choice for your next chapter. Your hands. We see them shaking, Tom. It's not safe for you here with the heavy machinery." My hands weren't shaking. They were resting flat on the table, steady as the stone in the graveyard. I looked at Mark. "You think this is the safest choice, son?" Mark cleared his throat. He shifted his weight in the chair, the wood groaning under him. "Dad, Cynthia knows the market. The business needs this. It's hard having you around the shop when the corporate guys come by. You make the place look old, like we're behind the times." The kitchen went dead quiet. The clock ticked. Once, twice. A man can bear a lot of weight. He can bear the loss of his youth, the death of his wife, the hardening of his joints. But when his own son uses his life's work to call him an embarrassment, the weight drops. "I see," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't throw the potato. I picked up the brochure, looked at the picture of the white building, and folded it neatly in half. "The truck comes next Monday to clear the house for the staging team," Cynthia said, standing up. She thought she had won. She thought the old man was broken because he didn't fight back. "We'll help you pack your clothes this weekend." "No need," I said softly. "I'll handle my things." They went to bed. I heard them laughing upstairs, the muffled sound of a wine cork popping. I didn't sleep. I went down to the workshop. I opened my old red steel toolbox. Every tool inside had a purpose. I took out my heavy-duty industrial impact wrench, my sockets, and my specialized hydraulic calipers. The things that made this shop a real business. Then I took out the original commercial property deed from the hidden compartment under the workbench. The deed wasn't just for the land. 35 years ago, when I bought this lot, the Coastal Authority gave me a grandfathered environmental variance for industrial waste runoff. In Oregon, those old permits stay with the original owner. They do not transfer to a new lease or sale unless the owner signs a specific Form 402 waiver. Without that permit, the land cannot be used for commercial mechanics or truck storage. It reverts back to agricultural zoning within 30 days. Cynthia's corporate buyers from Portland knew the law. That's why they needed me to sign the expansion papers. They thought Mark already had the power of attorney. They thought I was a rubber stamp. I didn't destroy the papers. I called Arthur Vance. He was an old ship captain I served with, who now ran the largest marine salvage yard in the county. "Tom," Arthur said, his voice gravelly over the phone line at 2 a.m. "What's wrong?" "I'm ready to sell the grandfathered variance, Arthur," I said. "And the equipment, all of it." "You sure? That shop is your blood, old friend." "The blood's gone thin," I told him. "Bring the flatbeds at dawn. While they're asleep." At 6 a.m., the rain stopped. The sky was the color of a wet slate. 3 large flatbeds from Vance Salvage pulled into the gravel driveway. They didn't use their air brakes. The men worked in silence, old harbor workers who knew how to move heavy steel without making a racket. By 8 o'clock, the workshop was empty. The hydraulic lifts were unbolted. The lathe was gone. The heavy diagnostic computers, the spare axles, the air compressors, even the steel racks on the walls. Everything was loaded onto Arthur's trucks. The concrete floor looked huge, gray, and stained with 40 years of honest sweat. Arthur handed me a cashier's check. It was for a substantial amount, more than enough to buy a small cottage down south where the winter didn't bite so hard. "Where will you go, Tom?" Arthur asked, wiping his grease-stained forehead. "Where the water's clean," I said. I walked back into the empty workshop one last time. I stood by the greasy workbench. I took the heavy iron padlock key, the one that used to open the main tool cage, and laid it right in the center of the dust. I didn't hate my son. That's the thing people don't understand about fathers. You can't hate the boy you taught to walk, even when he walks right over you. But you can realize that he needs to feel the cold ground before he understands the value of the boots you bought him. I see creators on the internet talking about total destruction and ruining your enemies. They make it look like a game, like a movie with loud music. But in the real world, when you have to cut away your own family, there is no music. There is just the sound of your own shoes on the gravel as you walk toward your car alone. I left the keys on the bench. I didn't look up at the bedroom window where the curtains were still drawn. I got into my old Ford, turned the key, and listened to the engine catch. It was a perfect rhythm. A machine doesn't lie to you. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small diner in Crescent City, looking out at the redwoods. My phone rang. It was Mark. His voice wasn't the voice he used on Thursday night. It wasn't the confident tone of a man taking over a legacy. He sounded like a child who had dropped his ice cream in the dirt. "Dad, where are you? The buyers from Portland came by this morning. They brought the inspectors. The shop is empty, Dad. There's nothing here. The lifts are gone. And the lawyers, they said the commercial variance was sold to Vance Salvage. They canceled the contract, Dad. The corporate deal is dead. Cynthia is. She's packing her things. She says I ruined everything." I looked at the steam rising from my black coffee. Outside, a crow was sitting on a mossy fence post. "You told me the machinery made the place look old, son," I said, my voice even steady and low. "So I took the old things out of your way. Dad, please. The bank is calling about the primary house loan. We can't pay it without the distributor license. We're going to lose the house." "A house is just wood, Mark," I told him. "Your mother and I built that place on hard work. You thought you could build it on betrayal. It doesn't hold the weight." "Where am I supposed to go?" he cried. He was sobbing now, the cheap whiskey and the panic finally breaking through his skin. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The warmth went down deep. "I left the key on the bench, Mark," I said. "The workshop floor is clean. You can start from the bottom, just like I did." I hung up the phone. I didn't block his number. A man doesn't hide from his choices, but I didn't call back either. I finished my breakfast in silence. The sun was finally breaking through the heavy Oregon mist, hitting the hood of my truck. For the first time in 3 years, the air felt clear. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. If you were in my shoes, would you have left him the empty workshop, or would you have signed the papers to keep the family together? Let me know in the comments. I don't ask if you think I was right. I just ask if you think he'll ever learn how to use that wrench.